Welcome back to the Grand Duke Dmitri Diary series. We're in 1939. I did not do a good job setting up the camera today, so everything is askew. I'm back in the old director's apartment at Schatzalp, probably one of the more boring places that I could do a video. But it's cozy and it's removed at the moment from where the restoration work is going on in the hotel. So, and I'm being lazy. So here I am. But my hope is to get down. Well, I do have to go to town today and do a short video of the train station, because that's what we have today. We have Dmitri arriving at the train station. So I'm going to try and do that for some more interesting and authentic scenery today, although I shouldn't say this is inauthentic, because Dmitri was certainly in this apartment. He was a friend of the man A.W. Federle, who was the director at that time. You see this reproduction of a painting behind me, and that peasant woman lying in the grass, that's about how I feel after I walk into town and then walk back up again, or I should say hike back up again, when I'm on days when I'm doing work in the library in town. Anyway, okay, so this is the long letter that Dmitri wrote to his sister, the first one, after he'd arrived at Schatzalp. So the date is the 23rd of September, 1939. And he's talking about, today in the section that we're doing, he's talking about what happened on a Friday in September. The 1st of September, 1939, another day like the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941. 1st September 1939 was a day that lives in infamy, the day of the German invasion of Poland that started the Second World War. As for our cast today, we have no one but Dmitri himself, and he wasn't even traveling with a servant, because probably for the first time in his life, because in the past, the luxury sanatoriums did allow you to bring whoever you wanted. You could bring servants, you could bring family members, including children, to stay with you in the sanatorium. But that was a different era. And by 1939, they understood that TB was a highly contagious disease, and it was no longer allowed to bring your own personnel or family members. Dmitri could not, for instance, have brought Paul with him to live with him in the sanatorium. And, back in the 1920s, that would have been allowed. Okay, so 1st September, here we go. The weather was splendid, and oddly, the altitude didn't bother me at all, nor is it bothering me now. In the past, it did bother me. When I reached Davos, I went to the Hotel d'Angleterre. The news was already out about the Germans crossing the Polish border, and it was horribly upsetting, because there could no longer be any doubt about war breaking out in Europe. The question was only when, and it was clearly a matter of hours. There could no longer be any doubt that we Europeans were entering a new era, the end of which would be as difficult to predict as back in July, old calendar, 1914 in Petrograd, ! The gathering at the Winter Palace and the patriotic ecstasy that prevailed there put us on the road to Alapayevsk, a frightful end. Only during wartime have I seen a town as empty as Davos. Of course, it is the low season, but beyond that, the Swiss army has been mobilized, and so there are no men to be seen, except the elderly, who pass the time here and there. The poor horses, they too have been mobilized, and since they were very scarce in Helvetia, To begin with, they are generally not to be found now. I was nonetheless able to get a droshky from the station, but the horse was on its blank. There's a word there I can't make out. And the coachman walked alongside it. Okay, so that's what he found when he reached Davos. So some interesting things in this little section. He writes about how the altitude had not bothered him in the past. So what does that mean? Well, for one thing, it means that he and Audrey, while they were married, used to go to St. Moritz every year, which is very close to Davos. It's only, I think, about an hour from here on train. I've done it twice. I need to do it again this year. That's not very many trips to St. Moritz, considering I've been coming to Davos for over 30 years now, every year. But anyway, yeah, so they would go. That was before there was a jet set in the sense of taking jets. It was where the people who were like the jet set would go every winter. So he was used to the altitude, and in fact, I haven't confirmed it yet, but I would guess that he had been in Davos before, because he was a very avid enthusiast when it came to bobsledding. He loved bobsledding, and Davos had a world-class bob course, and so he had probably been to Davos to watch the bob races and sometimes even participate as an amateur in some of the bob races. So, that's one of the reasons I need to go to St. Moritz, for instance, to see if I can find any traces of him in the participating in the bobsledding there. Okay, so the altitude had bothered him in the past. It's not bothering him now, so that's good. When he gets to Davos, he goes immediately to the Hotel d'Angleterre, and we will be talking about that in more detail in the next diary entry, because in this diary entry he just mentions, or here I am talking about diary entries, in the next section of the letter, because in this section of the letter he just mentions that was where he went. He doesn't tell us anything about it, and he actually has quite a lot to say about it. Okay, so what next? I'm very, he talks about how horrible it is for that the war has broken out. And his reference point, of course, is World War I. I suppose it was everybody's reference point when World War II broke out, because they would have remembered what that was like for the most part. And he uses this interesting expression, we Europeans. And his attitude had really changed from the time when we encounter him in the 1921 diaries. Until now, in 1939, his attitude had gone under, or his basic outlook had undergone quite a change. And he now was thinking of himself as a pan-European, that his patriotism was connected to Europe and not to a particular nation. He had, of course, the nations that he preferred, Russia and definitely France, but he was no longer doing the nationalist thing in a time period when so many people were. And he would explicitly refer to himself in a letter that we'll get to as a patriot of Europe. So, of course, he's horrified by this and undoubtedly scared, just like everybody else was. And, he talks about the outcome of the patriotic ecstasy, as he describes it, that prevailed on the old calendar. It was July. In the rest of the world, it was August 1914. And he was there at the Winter Palace. He was part of that gathering where the Emperor Nicholas II went out and addressed the population in this swell of popularity for him, in this swell of patriotism for the country, and it was ecstatic. And Dmitri at that time certainly wasn't feeling the ecstasy. If his sister informs us correctly in her first volume of memoirs, he was very, very unhappy about it and already thinking it was a disastrous thing. But it's interesting that he says that it's what put us on the road to Alapayevsk, so not what put us on the road to where was it, Pskov, that Nicholas abdicated, or Yekaterinburg, where Nicholas and his family were killed, or even Petrograd, where Dmitri's father, Grand Duke Paul, was killed. He specifically says this is what put us on the road to Alapayevsk. And what happened there? Well, Grand Duchess Elizabeth and Dmitri's half-brother Volodya Palais and his cousins, his Konstantinovich cousins, and I believe one of his uncles, were all killed in a really gruesome way in Alapayevsk, a frightful end indeed. And so he's, connecting the dots, this kind of patriotic ecstasy. This is where it leads people. So good for him. Not everybody remembered as the Second World War broke out. Okay, so he remarks about how empty Davos is, and part of that could be attributed to the fact that it's the low season. So I'm here now during the spring low season, and yeah, it's relatively empty. The streets aren't bustling, but that was something that all through the sanatorium era, it happened every year. Winter was the high season, and winter was also considered the healthiest season, the season when the cure was the most effective. So not only the hotels, for people that were doing sporting activities and social activities, not only would the hotels empty out, but the sanatoriums would empty out too. Despite the best efforts of the hoteliers and the sanatorium owners and directors to convince people that no, spring and summer and fall are a great time in Davos. But so that was part of the reason why things were empty. But, like for me, when I arrived during COVID, you could, it was eerie. It was eerie how quiet things are. I probably got one of the last trains too. I was very fortunate because I think I was 2 days ahead of the lockdown. I made it to Davos, and then I might not even have been able to get a train from Zurich to Davos. So yeah, it was an eerie kind of stillness and emptiness. So I can really relate to that. And when he says the Swiss army has been mobilized, I don't know that people necessarily realize how the war affected people in Switzerland, because the Swiss were really terrified. It wasn't just like, oh, we're neutral and the Germans like us and no problem. They were really terrified of being invaded. And so, of course, there was a general mobilization. And just as there was in the Second World War, I have a friend here who's in his 70s, and he was born shortly after the war, but he remembered his father's stories about being mobilized at the beginning of the Second World War. And so both men and horses were mobilized and requisitioned, and so there weren't men around. And that, of course, is something that Dmitri immediately finds striking. Both the absence of men, except for old men, the elderly, he says, who pass the time here and there, and the poor horses. He was an animal lover. He and Maria were both big animal lovers. And so, yeah, strange environment to come to. And interesting that he says horses have always been scarce in Helvetia, so the traditional Latin-based name for Switzerland. I don't know one way or the other about that. I'll have to ask around. Anyway, he manages to get a droshky. So he's using the Russian word, although he puts it in quotes. And why use the Russian word? Maybe he just couldn't think of the word for it in German or in English. I wouldn't know what it was either. So a droshky is a little carriage with seating for 2 people. It's low to the ground. It's small. In this case, we see that it's being pulled by only 1 horse. Usually they're pulled by 2 horses, so it clearly was a very small droshky. Maybe he didn't even qualify as a droshky, though he couldn't think of another word for it. And whether because of room or whatever it is that I can't make out the word that has to do with the horse was on its blank. The driver, the coachman, had to walk alongside it. Maybe there was just room for Dmitri and his luggage. Maybe there was just room for Dmitri and he had the luggage brought to the hotel later. I don't know how much he brought with him. Almost all his things were already in storage because he was living in hotels. So he probably didn't bring too much. And we know, in fact, that he wasn't able, he could have, but he didn't bring his stereoscope because he was afraid it would be confiscated. Okay, so that's that. Get in a little less than 20 minutes this time, which is great. And what do we have next time? Well, next time we have a description of the Angleterre and what it was like there and what it was like in town as he goes out to avail himself of what's available in town at this very, very strange, on this very, very strange historical date in Davos. So, as I said, while I'm in town today, I'm going to try, if possible, with my selfie stick to just take a little bit of footage of the train station so you can see where he arrived and what the surroundings looked like. And then tomorrow, I'm going to try to get a little at the location of the Angleterre, although the hotel itself no longer exists, but it's still an interesting part of town in the heart of what in Davos was called the English Quarter. Okay, so come back for the train station footage, and yeah, I hope to see you soon. Bye.